Hello, good morning, and welcome to Building Applications and Platforms for the Real-Time Web. Thank you for being here this morning. I know it's hard getting up for a 9 a.m. session in Vegas. So thank you, and we appreciate it. I have a willing panel of colleagues here from lots of companies that you may have heard of on the web: Facebook, Twitter, Microsoft, and Google. And today we'll be talking about the real-time web. First, I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Ryan.
Sure. I'm Ryan Sarver, and I work on the platform team at Twitter.
I'm Lily Chang, and I'm at Microsoft. I run a lab called Future Social Experiences.
I'm Ari Steinberg. I work on the feed at Facebook.
My name is Brett Slacken. My day job, I'm a software engineer on the Google App Engine team, but I'm also the co-creator of PubSub Hubbub, protocol for turning Atom and RSS feeds into real-time streams.
Okay. So when people say the real-time web, what comes to mind? Like, what are the key scenarios that you think that come to mind, and what companies do you believe are making these scenarios a reality?
Sure. I'll start in the end. I think we'll all probably do our own plugs, but for Twitter, I think the key thing for us is we have a strong mobile DNA. So we envision a lot of users, and again, the 140 characters are based on SMS limits. A lot of what we found our experience around is a user anywhere they are, traveling around the world with the weakest of signals of a device, being able to express themselves or share information with the people that follow them. That scenario can lead to all sorts of emergent things, from Iran to sharing what's going on in your neighborhood with you. So we feel it's very important to be able to extend the network out to these edges and into these devices to be able to support the real-time interaction.
Okay.
All right. So one of the things that I've seen is I think all communication is kind of moving faster, more informal, kind of more open. And so I think all the communication that you see in a lot of social networks like Twitter and Facebook are just sort of moving into the way people expect to get information, and increasingly people are finding information from their friends. And I think when I think of real time, at least kind of in the last 6 months, I've been really thinking about real-time search and how information from social networking sites are sort of moving into the way people are discovering new information.
So I guess I would sort of echo what you guys were saying, but I also would put a little contrarian angle on it. Like, I think that for us, when I think of real time, it's a balance. So, we've done a lot of work to like integrate more kind of real time stuff going on into our product, but at the same time, when we do that, it often comes at the cost of like the more sort of aggregated, like higher quality, like here's the things that happened since the last time you logged in type of stuff. And a lot of users are plugged in throughout the day, and a lot of other users just kind of sign on once in the morning and then like go about the rest of their day away from their computers. So it's kind of like a balance. Like, you need to kind of cater to both kind of use cases. So.
Well, I think one of the things that's really interesting going on right now is the kind of going back to the conversational model of communication on the internet. We've got comments on blogs and comments in forums and stuff like that. But I think some of the stuff that status.net Identica is doing and Clickset for kind of unifying conversation is really interesting, because it allows for a kind of threaded model of communication. A lot of the real-time communication thus far has been very broadcast-centric, kind of blasting it out there, as opposed to actually collating it into a conversational model. And I think that things are going in the direction of a conversational model. Like, Facebook definitely has a conversational model around stream items. So I think that use case is really interesting, because the interaction speed is so fast that people actually come to conclusions much more quickly, and the comments and kind of article feedback gets a lot more interesting. People fact check. You're starting to see just the quality of kind of lesser content sources get higher quality as a result of direct feedback. So I think that's something that's really cool to see.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that the comments are often like the most interesting part of using like our site, like seeing the discussions that are happening around something and not just the initial post. But I think that's also one of the trickiest products to kind of design for us, is that there's always this like balance where like you have a conversation with people that and it's exciting, and then like inevitably, if the audience gets bigger and bigger, the conversation kind of gets like less and less, kind of hits the lowest common denominator audience. So that's always another tricky thing to get right.
Yeah. So I think something Ryan and Ari said, there's a conflict that's interesting to me. So Ryan talked about mobile, like real time is really important on a mobile device. I assume that's because it's always on with you. While Ari said he felt the user kind of come onto their PC and they would want more curated content versus real time content. So is the way to look at it that mobile is actually going to be the key driver of real time, since I always have my device with me, versus doing real time on like web pages and in web apps?
I think there's multiple scenarios. I mean, for content creation, mobile is obviously really key. You're still very limited in terms of real estate that you can work with for consumption, unless you're getting little tiny bites like status updates or tweets or whatever. But there is definitely this other model that people log in and they want to consume something that's happened over some period of time and hopefully have all the best stuff percolate up. So I think there's just different interaction models, and you want to be able to support both because people, and a lot of times the same people, use both those models depending on what they're looking for.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that mobile kind of increases the amount that you can consume and that you can be plugged in, but I still would push back that I think there's, I mean, in the extreme case where, you know, as people keep publishing more and more stuff and they get more and more connected with other users, like there just becomes more and more content to consume. And so, like, we only have a certain amount of hours in the day. So at some point, I mean, we might not be there yet, and I think we can push users to consume more and more. And that's something we think a lot about, and I think mobile is a great way to do that. But sometimes, at some point, you know, someone gets too busy and they can't consume everything, and they can either get the things that happened, you know, in the 10 minutes before that they bothered to check, or they can get the things that happened over the course of the day, or maybe some combination.
It's also
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't think this is really limited to social networks. I mean, most people, probably the most overloaded form of communication is email, because typically that's where people are asking you to do stuff that you're supposed to act on. And so if you just look at your inbox, probably half of that stuff is stuff that you don't actually need to act on. And in some sense, the inbox is the model for real time, where things just come in ordered by recency. So I think it's a tricky design problem, how you filter stuff out and don't have people miss important things.
But it's also an attitude thing, because I think that, like, you know, if you miss something in your news feed, like maybe you don't want to miss a birthday or something, but otherwise, you know, people I think also have to get over the fact that it's okay to fall behind with like
Right.
some of the social stuff, whereas with email, it's like, oh man, I really gotta.
So I'm curious, so why does Buzz have an unread count?
That's a great question. That's really, I find that number, I find that number to be infuriating, because I never can keep up, right? But I know that they've done a lot of user experience design around that, about what's going to make people interested in it. So there's a difference between the psychology of engagement and kind of the end goal of actually having people kind of like step back and be like, all right, well, this is how much I want to actually participate. What's funny in Buzz is that, all right, it might say unread count 100 plus, and you're like, oh no, I'm falling behind. But then if you go in, at the bottom it will say, and there's some other ones from these other people, and you know, it's not really important. Don't worry about it. Like, so it's kind of conflicting in that way.
Does the number map to the number that get displayed, or the
number stresses me out.
Yeah.
I go into Gmail and see a number sitting in front of my face.
I hear that, and I hear also people they're like, oh, I love that number. Then I always know there's something new, and I don't like that number personally. It keeps me like clicking, but I guess it does keep me clicking. So I don't know. The number corresponds to the number of I think active threads. I don't remember. I don't think it's actually a number of messages in particular, like comments or whatever.
So speaking about updating numbers in real time and get on a web page, what are the technological concerns a developer should have when trying to build a page that's constantly updating with real-time information? Because when I think about a traditional web application, it's like, you know, request response. But now if you know, you have tens of thousands, you know, hundreds, thousands of users who are constantly polling the server to get information, doesn't that quickly become a burden on the service? Like, how have Twitter, Facebook, you know, Google and Microsoft kind of approached solving this problem?
Well,
lots of computers.
Whoever wants to take the question should just go ahead.
Well, I'll give you kind of a funny story. Maybe it's good if people in the audience are from Microsoft. So we started just thinking there was interesting data coming out of Twitter. So I had a dev that started playing around, and he also thought that Azure was kind of interesting. So basically the way we started doing Big Now was, which kind of consumes the Twitter fire hose and kind of all this other data, was just one guy basically playing around with Twitter APIs. And the great thing about Azure was it just scaled out for us. So like, I've never had to provision a server or anything. I mean, that infrastructure kind of came online for us at a good time. The team's been really great with us and working, you know, how to get latency down and things like that. So back end is super important, you know, and you have to wonder sometimes how small startups can, leverage those resources better. Because
it's actually been one of the toughest rows for us in opening up the fire hose a bit. Is the small guys all think they want the fire hose, but they don't realize what kind of resources it really takes to take like an 8 megabit per second connection and consume that, store it, process it. It's a lot of money, it's a lot of infrastructure, and for small guys, sometimes it can knock them over. I can't talk so specifically to what it takes to actually render that in terms of an experience. Like these guys are much more adept at that, but I think our focus on it is how do we get the information from our service over to someone else's as quickly as possible, so that they can go make some good decisions about how they render that to their users.
So is this a like, how many engineers are here? Like, do you guys want technical stuff? Or?
Raise your hand if you're a coder.
All right, cool. So I think like one thing that
Raise your hand
might
if
be
you're social media.
So one thing that might be interesting is that like I think there's traditionally like two models for scaling up like a kind of feed type system, and I think that I've never talked to you about it, but I think that Twitter uses a different one than Facebook, and I'm curious to hear more about what Google does. But there's sort of I think the MySpace guys were here the other day and talking about something similar. There's sort of the notion that you can publish content to one time to each user, and then when a user logs in, go out and fetch all of their friends' content. Or you can, like when a user posts an update, you can distribute it out to all of their friends at the time that they post it. And I think you guys do the second one. Is that right?
I don't want to speak for the guys doing it because I'll probably get it wrong, but yeah, the fan out is meant to go to each user.
Yeah, and we do the at the time you log in, that's when we do our fan out. And so I think there's one interesting property of that is that in terms of real time is that if you have to fan out at the time of writing, then there's the risk that you get kind of backlogged, and you might have like thousands of things to write out because the user has like tons of subscribers, and it might actually take longer to distribute that post to all of their friends. Whereas, like in our case, we're just posting it once, and then immediately all of their friends get it because their friends are like fetching it from them. But on the other hand, maybe your model lends itself more to like pushing the updates out.
It might be the kind of symmetry versus asymmetry too. Some users with millions of people that they need to fan stuff out to. Again, I'm not on the right team to talk that through, but.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that the approach, the real approach to make this work in both cases is you actually have to do both. You have to fan out up to say 10,000 followers, and then do it at read time for over 10,000. Otherwise it just doesn't scale properly. You actually have to do both. And it's interesting that Buzz right now has a 10,000 follower account. So, but the other thing you were asking about was getting information down into the browser, and this is something Google's been doing for a long time since. Google Suggest, I think, is where it started, where you could start typing a search query and it would pop up with results. And that was kind of the first instance of a channel in the browser back to the server. And we've had a lot of experience with this over time. The coolest project, if you're looking to do this for your company, I think is called Orbited. I think it's orbited.org. It's really cool. Open source, tons of libraries in different languages and server plugins and whatnot. It mostly solves like the long polling kind of streaming connection, hanging get problem. It's not perfect because it has trouble with transparent proxies and all kinds of crazy HTTP stuff your ISP is going to do you. But it's really good. It's really close. And yeah, it's interesting because people say, especially with HTML5 WebSockets coming out, people say, oh, well, why isn't this more standardized and so on? And the reason is that it's not reliable yet. Like WebSockets actually. I don't remember what exactly the figures are, but it's far less than 50% of hosts on the net can even engage in WebSockets. This is my understanding, because of the ISP filtering stuff that's going on. So I hope that WebSockets will be the future, and I think that will solve this problem because it'll allow for
kind of push ISPs to change.
Yeah, exactly. It'll have them change their policies, and I understand why their policies are that way, but if we're going to have these real-time connections, right now we're doing a series of hacks to make them work in the browser by using weird ActiveX components and other stuff. And in Mozilla, you open up some XPCOM thing and all this other craziness. And so we're hoping to standardize on it, but right now the actual infrastructure of the web itself doesn't support it. So it's kind of like it's really
by hook or crook.
Yeah, you're going to have to make it work. So it's really hard right now. But Orbited is the best one, I think, for people getting started.
Okay. Oh, and by the way, if people have questions, about any of the things they're talking about, feel free to stand behind the mic at any point in time.
Sure.
Sure.
Can we actually just
Crank up
Turn up the volume.
volume?
No?
It's up. Let's talk louder.
You said you should speak. All right, thank you. All right, so we've talked about getting information on the browser. So how about getting information to other services? I tend to use, I use a number of like status updating services, Windows Live, Facebook, Twitter, and I just started using Foursquare last week. And I've kind of noticed that for some of the services, they get updates instantly. Like when I change something on Foursquare, it instantly shows up in on Facebook or on Twitter. But on the other hand, when I change things on Twitter, it takes a while to get to friend feed or to Buzz. What do you think are the key limitations that are stopping like communication between services being actually real time? When will we get to a world where if I change my status in one place, wherever it is, Windows Live, Twitter, Facebook, it will get to all the other services I care about instantly? And do we care? Like, is that the problem that we need to solve, or are we just looking for technical problems to solve?
Well, I think it is something we should care about and need to care about. I think part of it is it's still really early in all of this. Like, we're just starting to all figure this out. And we're talking about different companies that all have different infrastructures, and we all took different approaches to solve different business needs. So as we start to build this up, I think we're now getting to a place where we need to figure out how to communicate better between the services. But I don't think it's an issue necessarily of policy or of lack of interest as much as it is around everyone focused on iterating and improving their own services and then trying to figure out how to all work together in this like growing ecosystem.
I mean, it's exactly an issue of policy. I mean, if Twitter's going to monetize the Firehose stream, that's how real-time updates are going to get into Facebook or how they're going to get into Google. So it's just policy. The technical aspects are very interesting for me as an engineer, but I don't think that's the actual limitation. I think that it's more interesting seeing the business agreements that are starting to develop between the different providers of different sizes, both small and large. FriendFeed has an agreement, I think, where they can, before they were acquired by Facebook, I'm not sure what it is now, but they can show Twitter messages in real time from the stream as long as the person's also logged into FriendFeed. So there's been a lot of different kind of policies, business policies around, kind of getting the message updates out there. And so, yeah, we can talk more about technical stuff, but I think policy is a big part of it. It's every kind of company wants to do it differently, and Facebook has their policy around their data too for getting the status updates out there, and that's actually one of the biggest differences. The technical challenges are also really interesting, but I don't want to hog it.
I mean, I think it's also just people, having to sign into all these services, giving their accounts and permissions to all these different places and making sure that the right people have, the right, have given the right privacy settings and the right client that they're viewing. And so, I agree with you. I think it's early, and people are also just trying to figure out their business models. Right. And so, I think we're still trying to figure out what's the best value of getting all your information together at once, and how do you provide the best experience. I mean, text messaging is probably the most predominant way people are still rapidly, sending messages to one another, and that's, very closed system, so.
So is it then too early to think about standard technologies in this space because we're still trying to figure out how the business models work, or should we be thinking about standards together or in parallel? For example, I know Twitter has a streaming API model for getting, if I want to get real-time data from Twitter, whereas Google talks about PubSub Hubbub, where the service I can do a publish subscribe kind of notification deal, and I don't think Facebook has a model yet.
Yeah, we don't have that service.
Yeah. So,
excuse me.
So, is there a better approach? Should we start consolidating our approach to actually sharing information in real time? Wouldn't that make things easier for the services that aren't concerned about these business deals?
I think it's a long-standing question in any type of service, and we like our technology for our business needs and for what we're trying to do. We think the streaming API is the right approach. It is built on standards in terms of JSON and XML, uses HTTP long polling and all sorts of other services have been able to write libraries for it quickly and can get to it. So for us, we think it's the right approach. We're definitely looking at PubSub Hubbub, but for where we are now to add another piece of infrastructure into what we do, that means it's less time that we're putting towards the service that we think creates and models our business the best.
So, I mean, from the Google, and I understand that. That makes sense to me. From Google's perspective, and I think just speaking for kind of the web community that's implementing PubSub, for them, they see it as a single API. So I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but try to spell that out, you'll find it. It's a really funny name, but it represents a single API for doing notifications. That's the idea. We've got a lot of providers out there that are pushing out updates in this format. So as a developer, it's really easy for me to integrate and consume feeds in this way. And FriendFeed, again, now part of Facebook, was one of the first and best, still one of the best clients for this. And what's really cool about them is, the barrier to entry is extremely low. That's kind of why we think this is important. So if you have a blog or some kind of feed of any sort, inventory feed, whatever you want, and you
Feedback.
Yeah.
and you PubSub enable it, it'll get pulled into FriendFeed immediately because FriendFeed will discover it, it'll pull it in, and there's no problem. And so, sorry.
Is there something we
you?
can do about that?
Maybe it's the speaker.
Talk louder, okay. Sorry. So anyway, I was just saying that it allows for kind of discovery and open integrations to happen really quickly, which is really useful because then, if I want to get my stuff into FriendFeed extremely fast, I don't have to ask anyone. I just turn it on and it works. So for Buzz, that's especially important because a big part of Google Buzz is kind of federation and kind of unification of the stream. And what that means is that you can connect your blog or any external site to Buzz. It'll get pulled into your Buzz stream with attribution to the original source, and they'll get re-syndicated into your Buzz stream to other providers. So we're kind of creating a focal point for consumption and interaction by pulling in from other sources. And we pull in from those sources with PubSub. So just like FriendFeed, if you have a HubHub-enabled feed and you connect the site to your profile, it will come into Buzz in real time. And it's actually kind of haunting. If you post on LiveJournal or Blogger or WordPress, which all support it, click the button, you'll just see it pop up in Buzz, like 1-2 seconds.
Can you list some of the companies that currently support PubSub?
Yeah, so MySpace, Google, LiveJournal, FriendFeed, and Facebook, because they're subscribing to it. Superfeeder's a subscriber, ClickSet. TypePad from 6 Apart, they're doing stuff with it. The list is always really long. Tumblr, Posterous. I think Fido's doing some stuff with it. Feedburner at Google's doing stuff with it. And there's some other integrations in the works from bigger players. Huffington Post and Gawker have also embraced it at their publishing side. So even the content publishers are kind of understanding the angle on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you would say that it's gaining momentum as a technical
Yeah.
kind of de facto standard?
It's definitely gaining momentum, and it's a specification people like and find easy to implement. I think what's interesting also is that it's not at odds with what Twitter's doing in terms of a business model. I think that's one of the biggest pieces of confusion that people have. They say this argument of oh, well, Google wants it open and Twitter wants it closed, and it's like, no. It's like we all want to figure out our business model. That's great. And I think what you said was actually the most right point, where it's like Twitter wants to execute on what they're doing, and they don't have time to kind of split the resources. That's a pretty good argument because you want to make forward progress. I totally understand that, and that's a good counter argument. I don't think that it's an either or and I don't think it's about forcing business policy on things. I don't know if you guys saw, but there was a recent thread with DeWitt Clinton from Google, kind of calling Twitter out on a couple of things about their business policy, and I'm like, dude, you got to calm down because that's not the point here. The point is making it really easy for developers to connect with each other, and the business policy stuff will kind of follow. We'll figure that out,
Yeah, it's definitely not it's just a way of pushing information around. It's the exact same information, moving to different places, 2 or 3 different ways to do that, and I don't want the conflation of business model and policy to be in there with technology. For us, it's just an issue of where we're going to put our resources.
Yep. Makes sense.
Excuse me. Just for anyone who wants to ask a question, when you ask, please introduce yourself first and then ask your question. So,
my name is Mike Parsons. I work for an ERP enterprise vendor, and my question relates to how do we consume all this information. I mean, we have these huge fire rolls of information coming at us now from all these different streams, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are and what kind of innovation and stuff is going on within your companies for mere mortals to be able to usefully consume all this information.
What do you mean consume at a technical level, or
No, not a technical level.
The
It's
eyeballs.
just filter out the noise and
right? Okay.
So you mean like actual user experience? Like,
Yes.
like okay.
Yeah.
You want to take this?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I was getting at in the beginning. Is that for me, it's difficult. Like, I don't have time to, even though like I work at Facebook and I'm on it all day, I still don't actually read like what people are posting, and it takes a lot of time. I mean, that's why we have our sort of top news product that kind of shows you it sorts things according to like, the one that we think is going to be most interesting on top. And we try to make it so that if you just log in once a day, check it in the morning, that's all you have to do. If you're bored and you want to like see more stuff, we want to give you that option also. But we want to make it really easy to see the like most important thing.
So
I think there's a couple things that we could do just in designing software. So like if you just look at the way people consume information and use these tools, some people have really small networks, some people have really big networks, some people post a lot. People have really extremely different behaviors and amounts of information that they can consume, and we could detect that really easily. So if you have, 5,000 friends that you subscribe to, or you have 5,000 unread messages in your inbox, like you can probably handle more content than the person who's a zero inbox type. And so I just think the UI can adapt to what kinds of information streams, the amount of information that you can handle, and then I think we can just be better at watching your behavior to see who you really care about. And I know you guys started doing that with your list of like, people that you most likely might want to chat with on this side. For Twitter, I'd love to see like people that I actually @ or D could bubble to the top of my friends list rather than the last people that I friended. And so I just think, you can make those people that you care about, their notifications stand out. I mean, you can just bubble that all throughout the UI. If I look at you, I might see who you actually care about rather than just the random 6 people that pop to the top. I mean, it just feels early as far as the interspace is concerned, and I think we should try to do these things as much as possible without the user having to configure every knob, and you can always tweak it.
I think the amount of noise is only going to grow from here. I mean, this is, again, just the beginning of it, and as we were talking about earlier, the comments are going to be real time. Every piece of information, I think, as it starts getting pushed around more and more. So we need to see more services take this type of approach. On our side, we feel strongly that we aren't the end-all, be-all for what and how you should consume Twitter content. We want to get it out there to as many partners as we can and let them kind of riff on the type of experience they want to create. There's one that I always talk about called the Cadmus. CADMUS, I think it's thecadmus.com. But they take a totally different approach to it. So they take your timeline, it's actually more like top news, but done on top of Twitter content. They rank it more by number of @mentions, number of similar content, and they, instead of time ranking it like we do, they rank it by popularity down, which I think is a great approach, and we'd love to see more and more partners kind of taking different cracks at it.
Yeah, I would echo that also. I mean, there's no way we could possibly build an experience that maps to every single user's goals, and so I think it would be awesome to see more of that type of innovation, and that's why we built all the APIs that we have, is because we think those are really cool.
So I guess like a follow-up question for Ari. Lily talked about knobs. I know that Facebook used to have like a lot of knobs for managing your feed, and it seems that transparent approach has kind of been downplayed for a more opaque, like top stories kind of model. Was there any user kind of feedback or user data that kind of backed up that transition?
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that like anytime you give users a lot of different options, like they don't really care about them, and they don't, so the usage rate for going in and actually customizing this stuff tends to be really low. But if you present like cool stuff in front of them, then like the interaction, the people who actually look at it and find it interesting is really high. And it's really interesting how users really very, very clearly, on Facebook just want to, like, they're there because they want us to give them cool stuff, and they don't want it to be like a tool that they have to like go in and configure and customize and stuff.
Yeah. I think it's important to provide what you think is the best experience up front or unexperience without having users to have to go in and configure things right away. I think it takes a little more vision to try and figure out what that thing is, and takes a little more hard work, but I think it pays off, and I think we've seen it in Facebook's product.
For a certain group of people, it definitely does. But I think it's interesting hearing like the people on the far end of the spectrum who are, say Twitter power users or Facebook power users, they're like, I want this, I want friend groups, and I want my own ranking, and I want my own filtering. And one of the things that's great about having APIs like Twitter does and like Facebook does and like Google Buzz is working on right now is that these third-party clients like Brizzly are going to be able to create a totally different experience that's kind of best for, say, power users. Yeah. And so that'll be able to solve the need, and then kind of the power user, and the actual site can kind of focus on the user experience of the most common user, which I think is a good thing. It's been really interesting seeing a lot of the feedback about every time Facebook's changed their newsfeed, and same thing with Google Buzz, people talking about their newsfeed. It's like this. It's actually the same criticism from the same people about how it's not good enough or it's not functional enough. But it's interesting because if you talk to like your mom or something, they're like, "This is great. Like I see, new cat photos or something." And I think that's the other tension that's here is comparing power users who really know what they're doing with people who just kind of want to have a good time online.
Yeah, we've really enjoyed seeing how the ecosystem kind of plays some of the stuff out. There's Loics in the audience who did a Seismic Look, which was one for a non-logged in Twitter experience, and like they didn't call mentions like @ mentions. It was like mentions of your content. They changed the language to be something that's a lot more consumable for the mainstream, which is great because hopefully it's on a bunch of machines. And there's kind of us in the middle who takes like a somewhat minimalistic approach. And then there's like TweetDeck on the far end that has like so many knobs that like you can't even find them all.
Exactly.
But it's great because users can kind of like self-select into these buckets, and then those guys know how to build an experience for that specific audience, which I think is great.
What I think is also interesting is everybody's also doing the phone client, which forces the minimal, like it forces you to kind of pare down the UI. So I do think that that's helping a lot of the app builders kind of focus on kind of the essence, and then you can kind of build out a lot more stuff in the client.
You have a question?
Hi, I'm Betsy Aoki. I do social media for Bing. I also launched the Xbox Indie Games platform where people write games for the Xbox and offer them up for sale on Xbox Live. And then I'm known as Microsoft's blog queen. I got the employees blogging on different platforms several years ago. And my question actually combines the success of Farmville on Facebook and just sort of the startlement of the game industry with this kind of social media, social games. Are you guys seeing changes to the APIs or a way of thinking about the real-time streams to support this kind of gaming, if that makes any sense? Or are you seeing a convergence?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely like something that we're constantly struggling with is that, when we built our product, we weren't thinking about games at all. Like, it never even occurred to us that would be interesting. And that was like one of the most probably surprising things that came out of our platform was that, oh my God, people want to play games. Who knew? It's like that we're not a gaming company. But it's also a struggle because like there are some users who do want to, and then there's also at least as many users who don't want to and who really don't want to see it. And it's like one of the most common complaints is that there's too much of like I don't want to see this stuff. And so I think it's a struggle. One thing that we've done recently that I thought is kind of might move in the direction you're talking about is like having a separate kind of gaming dashboard where you can go in and see the activity specific to games and kind of separating that from other applications and from other things that happen on Facebook. And I mean, some of the really popular game content can still show up in the kind of standard feed, but you also can have like for users who really want to see all of the stuff that's going on in the games, you can have like a more lightweight place to publish that only goes to the kind of the people who are more opting into that experience.
I was just thinking for the people coding against the APIs, would there be separate ones that would be the game-only channel or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is like there's a mechanism now where you can publish activity to the dashboard and and I think not have it go into the main feed. So that might be the first step in that direction.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because I feel like the game guys have loved it so much because they can tap into this whole market and kind of reach out into these like social graphs. And if they suddenly are siloed over, I can't imagine that they're going to want. I mean, the whole idea of this virality of it comes from being able to pull people in that might not have thought they wanted to do gaming.
I mean, there's definitely some of that, and there's always tension because we reduce the virality of some distribution channel, and people get upset. But I actually think really there's kind of the short-term effects that happen when you change those things, but really the thing that matters is building a good experience on your site. and a lot of people when they first think about using Facebook Connect or using our platform or whatever, like they're thinking, oh my God, like viral distribution. But I think actually by far the most interesting part of it is that you get this social, you can connect people to their friends like within the context of your site. And the reason I think those games are so successful is not so much, the reason that they can grow so quickly is maybe they're figuring out some clever viral tricks or whatever, but the reason that they get people to keep going back and keep playing is because they're playing with their real friends, and it's like exciting, it's cool, it's like a social experience. And like, even if we completely, not that we would do this, but even if we completely eliminated like all distribution on our site for those games, I bet people would still go back to it because they have their friends on that game, and it's fun.
Do you find that people opt out? Because I know like in your feed you can like not get, you could let people just opt out of it rather than really segment it off.
Yeah, some people do, but it's you're only covering like at best like 5 or 10% of the users if you're relying on them to kind of explicitly choose to do it. Yeah.
So one aspect of real time that we haven't talked a lot about is search. So there's a lot of I've seen a lot of talk online about the fact that now we have all of these real-time streams of information. We can do, I think the term is sentiment analysis, and there's all this location, like with all this location data, maybe we can do location-based search. What are your thoughts on like real time and its impacts on search? Is this really a transformative technology like the pundits tell us, or is this just a fad?
I hope it's not bad. I think, it's just going to be another layer of search. I think we're talking a little bit beforehand around different types of search and is real time effective. And I think it totally depends on what you're looking for. There was an article in the New York Times right after Fort Hood. Noah, I think, was the author of it. And he was talking about how he was on Twitter trying to search for what's going on in Fort Hood. If you type in Fort Hood to search, you just see people talking about Fort Hood. But if you did like near Fort Hood and you just narrowed into the people who had said that they were in Fort Hood, you suddenly found people who were, wives of a soldier on the base. You found people who were, medical help, and all of a sudden this like conversation just like came out of the page. And I think that's where real-time search has a ton of power. Location is a really key component to it because it helps you tap into a local conversation that you may not have seen before. But there's a lot of times people are just looking for like news outlets for links, and that time, a lot of that stuff can just be done through like Google's existing search with more of a focus on faster indexing, I think. But it just depends on what use case you're looking for. I think there's definitely a use case that it serves, and it's very powerful for that.
So Facebook doesn't really have. Do you have a real-time search experience?
We do have a way to search people's posts, but it's pretty buried. It's not. We haven't really found. I think there are those cases where it's really cool and impressive and interesting, but I think at the same time, like most of the time people go onto Facebook because they want to interact with people they know and not because they want to interact with or they want to like see what random people all over the world are saying. So a lot of those, so we've made the default experience of our search like go to only searching posts by your friends instead of posts by everyone, or yeah.
So to kind of counter, I think of everybody in this room. If you could get the standing query of whatever this panel is, you'd want to read it. And that's probably one of the first uses that you saw of searching and things like Twitter that were really useful for people. And you guys aren't all friends. Maybe you are, but we're not friends. And so we could be.
She's very exclusive.
At Lilith. Yeah. But I just think sometimes the people that you want to talk to or hear about, you don't know. And so I just think that that's just been a super cool use of, the real time. And, I think we're still exploring what these uses are. And a lot of people really aren't that interested in looking at the real-time feed and just watching it because, yeah, it's pretty random. But if you could figure out trending topics from my network and surface those queries for me automatically, or, just show me the news today. There's so much searching that people do about things that are happening sort of in the immediate time frame, or trends that are new that, and what's changed over time for some of the topics that are really hot. It just feels like that's what people care about a lot. You know, I mean, some people do care about, you know, what was really important that happened over time, but they're probably interested because of some trigger that's happening now. Some friend mentioned it, they read a story about it, something new happened to that company, that they made some announcement. And so, you know, it just doesn't feel like our real-time search today is as good as it could be.
It's so early in this.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of power that's been put at like large web indexes before, and I think now we're starting to get a lot of that same brain power looking at like how do we pull out these like salient bits out of these little tiny pieces of information. And sometimes it literally is a single tweet with like an image to the Bay Bridge coming down,
or you
the cable.
even think about, you know, we talked about information overload. Well, search is a great tool that a user can use that's really simple to filter out the information overload. So how many people use search and email? Well, it's just useful, you know.
But I think I would differentiate between two kinds of real-time search. I think there's the transient search, which is the time and place search, which is like hashtag this panel. And that's something that's pretty easy to do, like, and that's what people are doing. And you know, Google's integration with a lot of these real-time sources is kind of that. Basically, it's like keep a standing query open on this term, and then like compare it to the feed as the feed comes in, and then show me what's new. But what's really hard is ranking things over a larger window than just the transient nowness, and it becomes a problem, especially like trending topics, where the amount of spam starts to increase on trending topics over time, like dramatically. So I think what's left to do with real-time search in particular is removing the spam, ranking it against the rest of your search index, and then kind of figuring out relevance.
Reputation and relevance.
Yeah, like relevance in terms of not just closeness and transient closeness, but actually like usefulness, you know? If you see a good exchange on Twitter between two people back and forth with @replies, ranking that as a conversation high up in the results because it's relevant to your query, that's very difficult to do. Right. Blended in with every other page that may talk about it or be a news article about that conversation. So I think that's where we're going, and getting the tools to do that is really important. You know, both in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of APIs.
Well, and also you don't even really know in many cases who the user is. So in the unauthenticated case, you know, a lot of humans out there have never even heard of Twitter who are searching, and they get kind of freaked out when you're like you know.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of user experience problems there, absolutely. And getting the right trust and the right metrics for why you should actually surface something along with the results from Wikipedia is like really difficult to do. And then there's the guy who was asking about user experience earlier. I think it also becomes a question for them, because if you're using, say, a Google search widget that's embedded in your page, or you're using, you know, an API from any of the different providers, if you want to tap into a search query as a stream, or you want to tap into it as a relevance search, that's really interesting, and that really doesn't exist that much. Like a stream standing query does, but a ranked standing query doesn't. You know, Google Alerts is the only thing I can think of that's like that, and it's really not that fast. So, yeah.
Okay. Before I ask any more questions, we have about 15 minutes, so if you have any questions for the panelists, please feel free to queue up behind the mic and ask away. Okay.
So that kind of made me think of, like, I mean, one thing that's really frustrating in Twitter is that it doesn't have the threading like really doesn't work, right? And you can usually, if you see someone reply to something, you can usually kind of trace your way back to
you have to work hard.
Yeah, but forget about going the other direction, right? If someone says something and you would have no idea that there's a whole conversation going on afterward.
Yeah, it was interesting. After Ev's keynote the other day, he was answering questions, and there's this really interesting thread of him saying, you know, ask me questions, people were replying to him, and I was in Tweety trying to go back and forth, and it made it so hard to get to what could be really valuable information. The whole conversation is the value of it, not these little tiny bits. Right. I think that's something we need to do a much better job of, is helping surface that for people. And the data's there, so actually some sites have tried to take on, like, here's, you know, a single thread, we'll go do all the parsing to put this in together. But we haven't offered great APIs to surface it, and it's something we definitely want to do.
Yeah.
Just kind of to riff on that, I think it would be interesting for people to start getting, you know, a lot of people say a lot of stuff, and a lot of things that you say gets no reaction. And the things that you say that do get comments or reaction is an indicator that, hey, maybe that's more interesting to people who are actually your friends or following you. And it would just be interesting for, especially as companies start kind of piling on, I think it'd be great for people to get feedback in a more just a great, business, and I'm sure there's a bunch of them, but for just like, well, who stopped following you? Why did they stop following you? What kind of things do people like? What kinds of things are people searching for? What are search engines trying to bubble up? Just trying to, for people who want to use these mediums to kind of promote their brand or themselves or their company or whatever, just what works better. Because I just feel like a lot of companies are really searching in the dark on that and creating a lot of noise. And they don't necessarily have the feedback that could help them.
So I think it was Eric Schmidt that said analytics are infinitely monetizable. I think people want to be able to know why things work, why things don't, like what about it that I'm working on has gotten a reaction from people. So that's something we're very interested in.
Yeah, we've been talking about social kind of implies people and people talking and stuff. For us, like as an enterprise vendor, one of the things that's really interesting for us is when systems start to add content to this. So, think of, your order entry system, sending out notifications to people that are interested, or, sensors that exist all around us. Where do you see that going when the conversations and the content includes more than just people talking about stuff?
That's an area that I would love to see us as a company get better at. It's something we allow people to do. Like you ever seen Baker tweets? This guy wrote a box that hooks up to an oven, and every time fresh stuff comes out of the oven, it sends out a tweet. There's botanicals. Yeah, there's a bunch of USGS. So we do kind of support it now. There's a lot of municipalities that are jumping into it. But I would love to see us do it in a more holistic way and maybe even separate them out a little bit. But I think it goes back more to our concept of identity. We're less about I am Ryan Sarver, I am from Michigan, and more about I can have multiple identities online that represent different aspects of my life. And so I think with the DNA for it is there. We just need to help some guys get better at it, and we would love to see more and more of it.
On the Google side of things, with a lot of the APIs that we're providing with GData and all the kind of integration points with the Google apps and all the kind of various data services we have, the big thing there is privacy and auth. So we're trying to make sure that if you do tap into a service, that you can get those notifications in a way that is trustable and also encrypted. And so, a good example is if you're doing reporting for a client into a spreadsheet or something like that, to be able to have these integration points so that the second that you change some data over here, that those will actually propagate through these integration channels back to clients or customers. And so I think that the big thing that's missing for kind of real time for data is defining the integration pieces. There's a lot of them out there and a lot of MQ systems that do it, and some of it's standardized to crazy XML specs that are 20 pages or 20 pounds of paper, and so I think that it's extremely useful because especially when you kind of have interconnected companies, you need to have an auth model that makes sense so that you can distribute information that's sensitive, like sensitive financials, and just a selective stream, and then make that propagate quickly. It's kind of like Toyota's production model, but for data, That's where this is going to get really interesting.
I'm just thinking back to what you were saying about the Farmville example in Facebook. I think in enterprise scenarios, people are really concerned about productivity and doing work and how do the distractions, reduce revenue in a sense. And so, even in Facebook, they've declined the games because it's decreased just fun, I guess, or the quality of information. So I think, it's kind of the desire of all of these devices to put out a lot of information, and you just want to make sure that you give a lot of infrastructure or control or whatever so that people can get the right information they want. Because you could just imagine being, a lot of spamminess in the enterprise means something really different than spamminess in a social network, I think.
Well, I think for our side too, we don't envision it being from machine to machine. The idea is that there's a human consuming it somewhere. So there is some balance also between how much do you allow some machine or process or system to just send information into it and then kind of noise up everything else. But part of that comes into the tools that allow you to consume it or allow you to filter out what's there. So I think there's, at least on our side, we are really interested in kind of service or machine to user and less about machine to machine.
So what about machines acting as proxies for users? So one thing that, rather than having the separate account that's posting stuff, what if I connect my own Twitter account to some system that's doing stuff? I think I remember there was, going back to the games thing, there was was it about a year ago? Yeah. a game that you can probably explain it better than I can, what it was.
Yeah, it was one called Spy Master that these guys used kind of some viral hooks and allowed you to just play on top of Twitter. It was an old kind of similar style game that existed elsewhere, but they brought it into Twitter. It grew like crazy, but a lot
so
of
you would
people
log in and it
unfollowed.
would send tweets.
Yeah, you OAuth with it, and they could then post on your behalf. So it was all approved, and that's the thing. Is like there was nothing shady going on in the sense that like they were hacking accounts and sending messages out. A user would approve them to go do these things. The people following them just a lot of times didn't want to see all that noise, and the only option we have at the time and still have is to unfollow that person. So we don't have a way to like suppress certain types of content. But so I think we've always had that struggle, and that's where we wonder a little bit too much about, you know.
So what happened to it?
It still exists. People stopped using it. There's such a backlash. People would be like, you know, I am unfollowing you because of this. So people stopped doing it more, and then they moved more and more to the DM channel. So for us, when there's another question around like what APIs have changed around gaming, we open up DMs a lot more because we have this kind of asymmetrical follow model. You can receive DMs once you follow somebody. If someone DMs you too much, you just unfollow them. Like it's a controlled model at least. So we've allowed the people that do have access to send out more DMs on behalf of games to the people that care about it. And if they start thinking it's too noisy, they just unfollow you.
Do you see different uses, or do you see different uses around like I think unfollowing works for your savvy users, but kind of your newer users who aren't really, you know, I don't want to unfollow my brother or something, you know?
We definitely do not provide enough tools. I mean, that's the biggest problem we have. We actually have the data on the source of where the information is coming from. We just don't allow them to say, like, I'm okay with listening to Ari's feed as long as it's not Spy Master. And that's something that we need to work on at some point.
You have a question? Please,
Yes.
Please introduce yourself first. Thank you.
My name is Scott. I work on an enterprise PLM software product. I'm a software developer. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of corporate islands of social networking tools, things like Chatter in Salesforce and Yammer, and if you think there's a role for those kind of targeted islands of social networking, or if you think better standards or better implementations from the public tool set could achieve the same thing.
Well, I would like to take that one first. So we have a Google internal buzz, and that's where we mostly test it. It's for Google Apps. If you have a Google Apps account right now, you don't have it. There's no internal buzz, but they keep saying how it'll be here soon. I don't really know when it is, but we've had it internally for Googlers for a really long time. And I'll say that it, like, just from my direct experience, and I'm sure people have had the same experience with Chatter and Yammer, being able to have kind of broadcast as a medium for inside your organization is awesome. It's great. It's really cool. And I'm not sure if Facebook has this too, but it's like the coolest thing about it, I think, is the level of visibility that it breaks down. So you can have someone who's, say, you know, an engineer who started 2 weeks ago bring up an issue they figured out. It gets escalated kind of up the chain, and eventually you have, you know, some VP or some, you know, even like our engineering directors or, you know, higher up, like commenting back and be like, oh man, we need to fix that like right now. And so it's provided this level of kind of connection across the height of an organization that's been really cool. And even if you didn't have an organization with multiple levels, I think just providing visibility into, like, people always say what they're working on right now, and there's lots of chances to do that. So yeah, I think that those behind the firewall kind of broadcast islands are awesome, really useful.
And they do need, in a lot of cases, a different set of features. At least when we work with Yammer, they build in a lot of stuff that we as Twitter probably would never build in as part of the core product feature. We internally use a lot of like private accounts to ship information around, so we use Twitter for a lot of it. But it's not a specific instance of Twitter that's just for internal use.
Yeah, we also have like a lot of internal tools and usage of our product internally that's probably different than what most people do. And I think it's a really interesting thing. I'd like to see. I think that there are ways that we could make our product work better for people who want to use it in at work. But yeah, I mean, we have one thing that's kind of cool. We have screen when you're walking into the if you're waiting for food in our cafeteria, and any kind of statuses that people post internally, it just cycles through them. You know, it's a really simple app, but it's actually like really cool because you see like random coworkers that you don't normally interact with, and you see things that just random things, and you know, sometimes it's useless, but occasionally it's something interesting, and you're just waiting for your food anyway. So it's not like it's not like you're doing anything else at that time.
Yeah, I think it's good to give people an outlet. So like otherwise they just, if you have an issue in your company, what are you going to do? Email everybody in your company? Like you're going to interrupt every person in their inbox, and you're a little more reticent to like post that stuff. Whereas I think with these tools, you're posting, if people are interested, they're checking it out. It's kind of the attention model that you talked about before. So it just keeps communication flowing a lot better. I think another thing on that though, it would be great to start pulling in some information from the outside. So one of the things that I see at Microsoft, because we have these, is, people are kind of like twittering on the outside, talking on the inside, and kind of have to manage all these channels. Mm-hmm. And what I would like is for people, in a lot easier ways, just to bring their external information in, because it kind of helps bootstrap. And I think, it's kind of sad if I go to Twitter to find out what's going on instead of the internal one sometimes.
You have a question? I think this will be our last question because we're almost out of time.
Hi, I'm Tim Sears, and I build social media analytics tools for a major PR firm. And my question was kind of around ethical and social responsibility and educating new users about that. What kinds of things are you doing or thinking about to help users know more about how to use your tools in an ethical or socially responsible way?
I mean, we have a few pages. I think there's one called like Facebook for Good or something that I don't know that much about it, so I'm probably not the best person to speak to it. But there are ways that you can kind of find out things that are going on the site that are interesting. We use our blog a lot to feature kind of interesting stories or things that are going on in the world that kind of relate to social media. I think someone built. I don't remember. Like is there something called like Peace? Have you guys heard of like peace.facebook.com or something? There's like an interesting. Maybe this never got released. Who knows? I think it was released. No, I mean go for it. Like if someone has a laptop and can say if it works, does it? But yeah, it was like a mashup where like it does like a search on our stream for people who are talking about certain issues, and it could show you kind of trends. I don't know if it's still up because it was kind of like just an interesting thing that someone built once. But
yeah, I think for us it's been a core of what Biz and Ev have thought about for the company for a really long time. So it's kind of just built into how we operate. And during the keynote, he talked a little bit about guiding principles, and one of them is like be a force for good. Allow these emergent things to happen because we hope the open flow of information is a good thing on the world. We've done smaller projects like around Haiti. I think it was Hope 140 or 140 Hope. Where it listed out like all the different charities and different ways you could give. If you are a charity, the better ways to use Twitter. Like try and put these into these kind of microsites sometimes to help people out around a certain focus. But we just hope that we build a system that's like emergent and open and allow people to do these good things. But I think we don't try and force it so much as just be there when they need it.
Yeah, I guess I'd add one other thing is that like just more fundamentally, we feel like the important thing is helping people communicate and like learn about each other, and then I think everyone kind of agrees that's like a positive thing for the world.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're now out of time. I'd like to thank everybody for attending our panel and thank our panelists.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.